Hello friends and welcome back to Sorry What. Today's story is the part 2 that I promised you. Go and get comfortable because without further ado, here's part 2. My suspicions were confirmed. Now I had to decide upon my strategy. First off, and it would be hard, but I knew this was the right move, I had to continue to act normal, not angry or suspicious. Next I'd have to contact a lawyer. Methodically I began the mental process of reviewing the steps in separating our lives. Throughout the rest of the day I focused on doing two things. Hang out with my kids, and avoid Mia and Langley. All the way home I did whatever I could to stay calm and maintain a neutral attitude. Occasionally I find my mind drifting toward what I'd heard and I'd speed up. "Patrick, slow down. The children are in the car," Mia said. Fortunately everyone was exhausted from the day at the lake, and bedtime came early. For the rest of the weekend I kept busy with the normal chores that all homeowners had. As much as possible I avoided Mia. I was concerned my facade would slip and I wasn't prepared to confront her. Yet. Because I worked at home in my basement office, I had to investigate my next few moves outside the home. I knew I needed a lawyer, but I didn't know any. I called both Tim Paris, my friend and financial consultant, and Ryan. I asked their opinion while explaining the situation and swearing them to secrecy. "Okay, if I share the sad news with Teresa?" Ryan asked. I told him of course, but no one else. By the end of the week I found someone that had a good reputation. 3 p.m. Friday I was in the office of Myron Overby. I studied the man. He seemed mild-mannered and soft-spoken. Several times I needed to ask him to speak up. As we talked I grew concerned. I was hoping to get some type of vicious shark. This guy looked like a pink-faced librarian with delicate speech and less than imposing appearance in his suit and neat bow tie. "Do you have any questions for me?" Myron asked. I hesitated. I just wasn't sure about this guy. I knew that it would likely be a battle with Mia. I just wasn't sure that Myron was the guy I wanted in the trench next to me. Noticing my hesitation, Myron spoke up. "Mr. Price," he began, "I notice a bit of reluctance on your part. I do understand. My mannerisms are polite and well thought through, I know," he added. "But please do not take my appearance as any type of weakness. My clients always come out ahead. Always. I assure you that." The last several sentences were spoken with a firm icy calm. I could see others underestimating Myron and miscalculating their strategies. I saw right then how competent and efficient he could be. "Mr. Overby," I stood and reached across the desk, hand extended. "I have no reluctance whatsoever," I said as we shook hands. Myron had given me a list of information he needed. We talked a little more. Finally he asked me a particular question. "Have you asked your wife about any of your well-founded suspicions?" "Not really," I replied. "Whenever I questioned her late nights and odd hours she would become angry. And before I overheard those guys talking at the lake, I didn't really think she'd betray me in this way. I mean, other than this, she's been a good wife and a great mother." I took a shuddering breath on the verge of tears. The reality of the situation was hitting home. My life was going to change forever. "Is it possible you could forgive her?" Myron asked. I sat for a while and thought about it. I did think there was a chance I could eventually forgive her, I told Myron. "But I will never trust her again," I told him. Myron looked back at me, fingers steepled nodding. He then told me how he expected things to go. He stopped and looked at me and asked one last question. "Is it possible to get some type of physical evidence? Anything, a text message, or a photo?" Myron asked. "Something with proof could provide us with leverage." I sat there thinking. After a few moments I told him I may have an idea. As we parted we made plans to reconvene next week. Meanwhile I started working on a plan to get evidence. That week I had a plan in place for evidence. I knew Wednesday was the day the auto dealership closed early. I parked my car at a grocery store 2 blocks away and walked to Langley Motors. Around 4 o'clock I stopped by to surprise Mia. I told her I'd been in the area. After a quick visit, when no one was looking, I slipped into the bathroom. I hid in the enclosed stall. No one came in to check. I waited. A little after 6 o'clock I emerged into the darkened auto showroom. For a few minutes I stood still and listened. At first it appeared all was silent. Then, faintly, I heard what sounded like female laughter deep within the building. Impossible to tell who it was, but I remembered the overheard conversation at the lake. Quietly I snuck toward Langley's office. The noises behind the office door, still muffled, were louder. The sighs and moans made evident what was happening behind the closed door. Phone in hand, camera mode ready, I quietly turned the knob on the unlocked office door. I was greeted by the sight of Langley's naked peach ducking her on the desk, just as he'd bragged about last Saturday. By the time I'd taken the 4th picture I knew I'd made a gigantic mistake. While Langley continued the ducking, she looked up and screamed. It took a moment and then Langley saw me too. "What the duck?" he yelled, pulling out of his partner. The partner I discovered was not me. It was his girlfriend Olivia. She was screaming for me to get out and for him to get off her. I had the barest glimpse of Langley's beautiful naked girlfriend spread eagle on the desk. Through a jumble of thoughts I completely understood why he chose to close early on Wednesdays. "What the duck are you doing in here, Pat?" Langley yelled at me, yanking his underwear on. My impulse was to turn and flee, but I knew this would create a much larger problem later. I needed to explain and perhaps, just perhaps, I could temper my embarrassing air. I fell all over myself apologizing and saying I'd made a big mistake. Surprisingly, Langley was not as furious as he should have been. With Olivia behind closed doors in Langley's attached personal washroom, I tried to explain. "Last week at the party at your lake house, I overheard you and some of the others talking out on the trail," I told him. He nodded, staring at me. It was hard to hear everything, but what I did hear sounded like Mia was the one, I hesitated, on the desk. At that moment Olivia emerged, completely dressed. Silently she sat down and listened to me explain. I told them that I'd wanted evidence, and that was how we got to the position we'd found ourselves in now. I apologized profusely to Olivia. She asked for my phone. She scrolled through the pictures and then showed one of them to Langley. "I kind of like this one," Olivia said good-naturedly. "Mia's a great person, attractive, and I've known her for a long time, but I am not having any kind of affair with her," he told me with an odd expression on his face. "You better not be," Olivia chimed in. Slight relief began to surge through me. They didn't seem particularly mad, and even seemed to be enjoying some of my photography. "Can I ask you a favor?" I said to them. I asked them if we could forget all this. I begged them not to tell anyone, especially Mia. I was embarrassed enough at this moment. "Pat, yes, we can keep quiet about all this," Langley agreed. "One condition," he told me. I was nodding vigorously. I would have done nearly anything for their silence. "We get to keep the pictures," Langley smiled and said. As I walked a few blocks to retrieve my car, I had a couple of feelings. Number one was embarrassment at my jealous air. The second one was relief that Langley and Olivia were so reasonable about my blunder. And finally, there was this huge sense of happiness that my wife was not having an affair. I obviously completely misinterpreted what was said at the lake. I vowed as I drove home to be the best, most tolerant husband, and not worry or question her about her irregular schedule. She was doing something that fulfilled her, and she was apparently quite good at it. I was happy for Mia. I began the process of mending any relationship fences that I damaged. I called my attorney, Myron Overby, and told him to stand down. After some brief questioning, he agreed. Flowers, small gifts, back rubs. I tried to show Mia how much I cared for her. I reflected on what a good mother she was. And I complimented her far more often, making sure she knew how much I appreciated her. "What's gotten into you?" she said one day after I'd sent flowers to her office. I just said that I loved her and loved our family. There was a general upbeat feel within our home that trickled to the children too. On the times we were all present for dinner together, the conversation was happy and animated. One negative thing that contradicted the renewed happiness I felt at home was Ryan's health. He was on a downward spiral, and often did not have the energy to play our normal chess match. He and Teresa were the only people I confided to about my suspicious blunder, catching Blake Langley screwing his girlfriend on his office desk. Despite his waning health, Ryan laughed wholeheartedly at my mistake. One of the last few happier moments we spent together. Mia still occasionally had late nights, unexplained absences, and slightly illogical answers for certain questions. My new mode was just to accept and trust her, no matter how odd her explanations became. Life seemed to go on for our busy family, with Mia's mom, an invaluable part of our household. She took care of the children when needed, as Mia's hours at Langley Motors increased to full-time. One evening Mia came home and told me she needed to be in Denver for a dealer conference in 2 weeks. It was a 4-day trip, leaving on Sunday, back on Thursday. "Who's going with you?" I asked, not able to stifle my curiosity. She said she was on her own, but there'd be other marketing personnel from around the country. Normally I'd be suspicious and more questioning, but I just mentally repeated the mantra, I trust her. I took her to the airport Sunday, and she took the 10:40 morning flight to Denver. She called me about 1:30 in the afternoon to tell me she made it, and the flight was uneventful. That week it seemed a particularly challenging time with the kids. By Tuesday morning I was stressed out. Mia's mom saw my condition when she arrived that day. "Why don't you go relax and have dinner with a friend or something? Just get out tonight, take a break," she suggested. "I'll bring the children's grandmother over. The two of us can handle them." I thought about it. She was right, I needed a break. I accepted her offer and planned on meeting Tim Pearce, my good friend and financial advisor downtown in the Fur District. This was a popular area with bars, restaurants, and trendy shops. We had a nice dinner, but afterwards Tim had to head home. He had a 6 a.m. Zoom call in the morning with his office on the East Coast. I checked my watch, not even 7 o'clock. I crossed the street to Valentino's, a bar we'd been in before that I enjoyed. It was crowded and I found a spot at the bar, ordered a glass of wine, and relaxed. About 10 minutes later, halfway through my wine I heard my name called. Pat. What are you doing here? It was Lisa Markham, Mia's good friend, married to Mitch. It was good to see a familiar face. She was at Valentino's with 3 other women, back at a table in the corner. I told her I'd had dinner with a friend and was just having a nightcap. She said she was on a girls' night out, and they were waiting for their table in the restaurant. Where's Mia? She asked. I explained she was away on business for a few nights. Oh yeah, I think she told me she had to go somewhere, Lisa said. What's Mitch up to? I asked. He's out of town too. I was going to go with him, but he said something came up and it wouldn't work. She told me, it's too bad, she said. Other than the airport, I love Denver, she added. Suddenly an icy chill slithered down my back. Did she say Denver? That's where Mia was. I had to keep my cool, but I needed more information. Was Mitch traveling alone? I casually asked her. She said he was. When did he fly out? I asked. Sunday, there's a morning flight. Gets an early afternoon, he's back Thursday. She told me in pause. Why all the questions? She suddenly asked me. I did the best acting job I could, deflecting her question and then changing the subject. We chatted for a few more minutes, and then Lisa's friends called to her that their table was ready, and she left. My suspicions were high. What a coincidence running into Lisa, I reflected. She never once told me she was traveling with anyone. Certainly not her boss, Mitch Markham. I decided I'd call her. I had a small hope this may just be some type of communication error. Maybe there was a logical explanation. I made the call. We chatted a little at first and I told her I'd gone out to dinner with Tim. What did you do for dinner? I asked. Just room service, she told me. I asked her if she'd run into anyone she knew. She told me no, she was on her own. I paused a second and then fairly quickly disengaged. Was it possible that Markham was in Denver for a separate purpose? Possible, I suppose, but unlikely. Driving home from the Fur District, I developed a plan. I'd need Mia's mom's assistance with the kids. I examined the various details and had a pretty good idea what my strategy was going to be. I got stuck with the center seat on the flight to Denver. I was just glad any seat was available at the last minute. On the shuttle to the rental car pickup, I reviewed my strategy. I would plant myself in the lobby of the Marriott Denver downtown, where I'd found out she was staying. If she was truly on her own, my visit would be just a big happy surprise, and we'd stay in Denver for the weekend. If something else was going on with Markham, we'd have a different type of confrontation. It was mid-afternoon when I got to the Marriott. Not much activity. I positioned myself in a shadowed alcove. I had a ball cap and a newspaper. I felt a little ridiculous sitting there, but I knew I had to find out for sure what, if anything, was going on with Mia. I sat and waited. Whenever someone would enter, I'd look up. Around 5 o'clock the lobby began getting busier. 20 minutes later I saw Mia arrive. She was alone and walked across the lobby toward the elevator. She was by herself in the elevator car. It had a floor indicator above the door. I noted the elevator stopped on floor 8. I checked my watch, nearly 5:30. I calculated that if she was going out, the earliest it would be was 6:30. After all, it was my wife and I knew her habits. I waited. 6:30 became 7. As far as I could tell, she was still upstairs in her room. I suddenly began to feel hopeful. Hopeful that there was some kind of logical explanation for all this. I decided if there was no activity by 7:30, I would call her and unleash the surprise. 7:31, I stood and found myself smiling. I had really leaped to the wrong conclusion. I reaffirmed my promise to myself to trust her. I strode across the lobby, ridiculous hat still on, heading to the elevator in floor 8. All of a sudden I froze, then turned away from the elevator. I recognized the voice talking loudly on the cell phone pressed to his ear. It was Mitch Markham. I stepped behind a large potted plant. He'd been so focused on his phone call he never noticed me. Through the leaves I saw him hit the up button for the elevator. Another couple got on. I stared as the floor indicator showed us stop on the 3rd floor. And then it stopped on 8. I retreated to the same alcove I'd been in all afternoon. I wanted to confront them. But by 8 o'clock they had not emerged. It appeared they were staying in. It did not take a genius to imagine what was going on. I just didn't know what room they were in on floor 8. I glanced over at the lobby shop. I improvised a plan. I asked the attendant if they would deliver flowers to guests. They said certainly. I gave them the name and asked if the delivery could be done quickly. They agreed, saying they weren't busy. I tipped the young attendant $20 to make the delivery as soon as possible. Then I took the elevator to floor 8. There was a small seating area near the elevator that provided a view down each hallway where the rooms were. I waited. I saw the young attendant stop at a door down the hallway. I counted, 5th door on the right. There was a brief interaction and a muffled conversation as the delivery was made. I moved down the opposite hallway as the attendant retreated. Okay, now I knew the room number, 809. I took the elevator down to the main floor and used the lobby phone. I asked for housekeeping. Could you send up some clean towels to 809? I asked. Once again I positioned myself near the elevator on the 8th floor. This time it took a little longer. I heard the chime of the elevator bell announcing it was stopping on floor 8. And then, the rumble of the housekeeping cart heading to 809. A brief knock and then the maid called out housekeeping. I was silently right behind the maid. I saw her extend the passkey, and she cracked the door open, towels in hand. That was all I needed. I barged past the surprised hotel employee and saw Mitch Markham naked, one hand hiding his genitals, peeking around the short hallway in the room. Ha, he uttered as he finally realized who it was. Pat, what are you? Surprise, he asked. What? Mia shouted, alarmed. She hadn't seen me yet. Markham moved toward me, holding both arms out, palms flat, in a halting gesture. My pent-up rage carried me toward him, my right fist burying into the soft flap of his gut. With a new off, he collapsed into a sitting position on the floor. I stepped over him and then saw Mia, topless, in a small pair of bikini panties on the bed. I also noticed the flowers on the bedside table. Patrick, she cried out. I just stared at her, absorbing what had transpired. Even after I'd called housekeeping, I still had a faint hope that I'd burst in and see them fully clothed reviewing sales charts. No, there was only one explanation as to what had happened. It was obvious. And as I stared, Mia began the typical litany of illogical excuses. It wasn't what I thought. This was only the first time, it was just sex, she loved me. Heck. Despite my emotional rage, I remembered enough to pull out my phone and get photos. Mia tried to cover herself with the sheet. Markham sat slumped on the floor. I was so tempted to kick him squarely in his exposed neck and balls. I didn't. After one last look at Mia, who was now sobbing and begging forgiveness, I turned to leave. Do not, I began, in a hissing whisper, plan on coming home to my house. As I was leaving, I heard her sobbing reply, I'm sorry, where will I go? It's my house too. I did not reply. All the way home I decided I was not going to be a nice guy. All the feelings of betrayal and lies bubbled up to the surface. I vividly recalled the feelings I had years ago when I saw her and Langley together at that party. This was like that, but worse. Much worse. I had multiple texts and voicemails from her. At my lawyer, Myron's advice, I saved them all. We may need them, he told me. Upon arriving, I told her mom everything. She had become such an integral part of the household, helping with Michael and the twins. I could not think of a way to explain Mia's absence. It also felt good to humiliate Mia and spread the misery round to her mother. Her mother was shocked. The next phone call was to Lisa Markham, Mia's good friend. She exploded in anger. I told him last time, if he ever did this again, it was over. Last time? Did this again? Obviously this was not unfamiliar territory for Markham. Needless to say, this was going to affect Mia and Lisa's long-term friendship. Good, I thought. I know I was being vindictive, but I couldn't help it, I was mad. And beyond mad, I was hurt. Terribly hurt. Hurt for what she had done to me, and more importantly how this would affect the kids. We were going to take them from a loving home, with parents living together, to a world of joint custody, less stability, compromised finances, and partial parenthood. Mia abided by my wishes and stayed away from the family home. At first. It was Sunday. I'd taken the kids on a short hike in the mountains. Everyone was tired and hungry when we got home. Sitting in the kitchen when we arrived was Mia. The kids, who kept asking where's mom, swarmed her. Despite anything that may have happened, there was no denying, Mia was a good mother. And the children had missed her. As she interacted with the children, hugging and playing, I noticed her checking my expression, quickly glancing at me, trying to test the temperature of my emotions. I stayed quiet. A stone Buddha, my face blank. Mia made a delicious dinner for the kids and me. There were moments when even for me this felt normal. But there was no way around the dark cloud of dishonesty and betrayal, unseen by the children, that hung over our household. The rest of the evening was getting Michael and the twins prepped for bed. In our household, this was not a short process. Bathing, pajamas, stories, and finally sleep. I sat in the living room, television off, awaiting the confrontation I'd so far avoided. I knew it was time. Silently, Mia entered the living room, sitting on the edge of the single chair facing me on the couch. She studied my face without speaking at first. Finally, with a deep breath, she began her apologies. "I need to explain," she finally told me. "All through high school at St. Thomas, I was the good girl. I had it drummed into my head by my mother and grandma that sex was for marriage. I had heard this all before. I considered this the Langley explanation. And then she talked about having a high school crush on Mitch. And then how when they started working together they became closer. One thing led to another, and well, she explained, they began to sleep together. But I will never do it again. I'll agree to whatever you want. Please, please, Patrick. I'll leave and quit my job," she told me. "Don't do that," I said to her. "No?" she asked, looking confused. "You're going to need the money." Mia was silent. It seemed like the practical ramifications of her actions began to sink in. This home, our lifestyle, plans for our children would likely all change. "Patrick, I love you. Don't you have it in your heart to forgive me? Please," she begged. "I'm not sure you understand what you've done," I told her. She tried to interrupt, but I talked through the interruption. "Forgive, perhaps in time, the kids and I will forgive you. It's just I can no longer trust you," I told her. "The kids?" she asked. "Why are you talking about the kids?" I sat there studying her, wondering how a reasonably intelligent woman was not getting it. "Mia," I said, "it isn't just my life you ducked up. It's the kids' lives too." She sat staring at me with a questioned look on her face. Joint custody, 2 separate homes, potential step-parents, compromised finances. This is the world they're getting because you ducked Mitch Markham, I told her. Her face crumbled. Finally, she began to understand all the results of her actions. Through tears, she begged for forgiveness. "You love me enough to marry me," she sobbed. "Can't you find that love again now?" "In reality, Mia," I said to her, "I married you because you were pregnant with our child. I wanted to give that child, Michael, a solid future. You've just destroyed that. If you hadn't been pregnant, I would have never married you." I was pulling no punches. She needed to feel as bad as I did. "No, Mia," I continued, "for me, you were not the kind of woman I wanted for a wife. Sure, we had fun. But life, particularly as a parent, comes with an obligation. That obligation is to raise your children in a responsible way so that they become productive members of society. I was not confident in you to take on this responsibility," I continued. "But you surprised me. I have to say you've done a great job as a mother. Though I can't say you've done a particular good job as a wife. Now I'm tired. I'm going to go and sleep in the basement on the futon. For now." "Patrick, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "One last thing," I said, ignoring her apology. She looked up hopefully to me. "You should probably get an attorney," I told her. I heard her sobs as I walked to the basement. Somehow, someway, life continued almost as if her infidelity hadn't happened. Almost. We all still lived together under one roof. For the kids, their worlds were normal. Mom and Dad and the kids all living together. What they may not notice was that I rarely spoke to Mia. And there was absolutely no physical interaction. No hugs. No hand-holding. No kisses goodbye. There was barely a dialogue unless it was absolutely necessary. That is not to say that Mia didn't try. In the evening after the children were asleep, she would pledge her apologies over and over. Any attempt toward physical contact I objected to and shut down. It was like we were living in 2 worlds. One world when the children were awake, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. And then the times when it was just Mia and I, where the Cold War was waging on our relationship. It was not a pleasant environment. A dark time in my life. And it got worse. No, our household with the described dysfunction continued. It was something else that darkened the atmosphere of my life. It was Ryan. He was on full hospice now. The doctors were saying his life should be measured in days. I would visit and Teresa would try to stay upbeat, but it didn't take much to shatter the facade of positivity. One day close to the end, I sat with Ryan as he dozed. I was quiet, just sitting, when all of a sudden Ryan gripped my shirt sleeve with surprising force. I looked at him and for a moment his eyes were clear. "Promise me," he whispered. "Patrick, promise me," he repeated. "Anything," I said, my head nodding, willing to do whatever was needed. It took a moment for him to summon the strength, but finally he whispered to me, Take care of Teresa. I promised him I would. 3 days later Ryan died. The funeral was sad and nice all rolled together. I spoke briefly about our friendship and what a good man he was. And then life went on. Sort of. The atmosphere at home was all about the children. Mia continued to be a good mother. Following my advice, she maintained her job at Langley Motors, and Mia's mom was a regular fixture at our house. My objective was to maintain the sense of normalcy for the children, but behind the scene, things were happening. I met the Tuesday night with Myron Overby to discuss the options around the dissolution of my marriage. What he told me was not encouraging. The stress Mia felt was constant. The only relief was in the short patches of sleep brought on by exhaustion. Even the joy of being with the children was stressful. There was a constant pressure Mia put on herself. If I'm not a good enough mother, Patrick will not need me. Mia thought back to the awful conversation with Patrick after the horrendous trip to Denver. He was so cold. He had told her that if she hadn't been pregnant he would have never married her. That was a sharp knife that went in cleanly. He had accused her, through her actions, of sabotaging the children's future, stability, and happiness. The pressure was on, constantly, to make up for her errors. She needed to compensate for her mistakes by being the best mother possible. And that was hard. She tried to talk to Lisa, her best and oldest friend. But Lisa had called her names and told her she'd ruined her marriage. Finally, she told her she never wanted to speak to her again. Fortunately, she kept her job at Langley Motors, but she had been called to Blake's office, and was told she was not to interact with Mitch. Mitch had been demoted, and Mia had noticed he now avoided her. That was probably for the best anyway, but the entire company was aware of the affair with Mitch. She knew about, and actually heard some of the hurtful gossip. It was embarrassing. If she'd had a choice she would have quit, but Patrick had said she was going to need the money. The only person that she could really talk to was her mother. She would discuss her actions and the precarious state of her marriage. But though her mother was great with the children and a good cook, she had no grasp of the situation. Patrick will come around. In time he'll learn to forgive you, she'd tell Mia. To Mia that all was incredibly unlikely. Mia summed up her life this way: a failed marriage, an embarrassing work environment, and constant pressure at home to be a perfect mother. All because she ducked a guy that in retrospect she didn't even like that much. Oh, and by the way, he'd been married to her now ex-best friend. It's likely you would get joint custody, Myron told me, but it's also likely that if you kept the house, your wife would retain occupancy. If you sold the house, the proceeds would be split, and perhaps there would be enough for each of you to afford a small house or condominium. I sat there thinking. I loved that house. It was perfect for the children. They had begun developing friendships in the neighborhood. The school they'd all attend was close to. I remembered when we bought the house and how ideal it was for our family. I continued to sit in Myron's office, fingertips absently tapping on the desk surface, contemplating a bunch of poor choices for my life. The idea of taking the kids out of their house and forcing them into some cramped condo was not what I wanted. There may be another option, Myron paused and said. It's become a bit more popular, though, given the circumstances it's not ideal. I looked at him silently, nodding for him to continue. Myron told me that he could create a post-nuptial agreement. Of course I'd heard of a prenuptial agreement, but not this. Myron explained it was a document for a married couple that outlined a series of legal agreements between the man and wife to protect them financially and personally. What would be in the document? I asked. He explained anything we both decided on. But it would be a solution about the children and the home. Essentially this: we would stay married. Financially we would have our own accounts, investments, and retirements. Monthly expenses would be divided proportionately to our individual income. We would make an equitable split of the house value years later after the kids were older. Specifically, once the twins turned 18, it was stipulated in the agreement the house would be sold and profits split 50-50, unless we both agreed to keep it. But if either one of us wanted out, the house would be sold. The other thing that would happen at this point is either one of us would have the choice to terminate the marriage without contest. Assets would be split 50-50, and either of us would have the option to buy the other one's share of the house at a discounted rate. Otherwise it would be split as stated above. We would function as married roommates. Furthermore, there would be stipulations about household guests. Neither of us could bring a date to the house. Any external romantic relationships were to be kept private without exposure to the spouse or the children. We discussed it a bit more. It wasn't perfect, but it may be the least bad alternative available. I asked Myron to put something together while I considered this option. Perhaps at some point, much later, in their adult lives, the children would understand the sacrifices made for their stability, I thought. I couldn't believe it. When Patrick came into the kitchen with the large envelope, I thought for sure it was a divorce document. Tears welled up in my eyes as he began talking. Partway through I realized I was wrong. This document was something else. The bottom line was we both would stay in the house. He would finish off a room in the basement adjacent to his office. And that would be his bedroom. At least for now. We'd still be married, but we'd be more like co-parenting roommates. There were a lot more details, but most of them wouldn't kick in until years down the road. I wasn't going to worry about any of that now. I'm pretty sure I'll get a chance to change a few things by then. This was the lifeline I needed. There were a whole bunch of rules and regulations that I happily agreed to. I didn't really even read the whole thing. I was signing the document before Patrick had even finished explaining it to me. Outwardly I was happy because we would not split the kids up or have to sell the house. Secretly I held out hope that I could win him back over. I thought back to when we'd first broken up right out of college. I was able to get him back then. I felt there was a chance I could do it again. At first it was a bit awkward. I was still extremely angered by her betrayal. Seeing her every day and having her act so normal bothered me. Though I was warm and loving to the children, I tried to subtly ignore me. I framed off an area next to my office in the basement and built a bedroom down there. For the kids, it didn't seem to be abnormal, and their lives continued to function innocently with no knowledge of the fracture within their parents' relationship. That was the deal me and I made, and it was laid out in the post-nuptial agreement. The children's future and happiness was the priority. The preservation of their lives came at a price that we both paid. One of the problems was, it would not be easy to have any kind of dating life. I quickly found out one of the first questions a prospective woman that I would approach would have is, "Are you married?" By the beginning of my second sentence, after I began with, "Yes, but," the woman was gone. The only potential would be someone I knew well already, and had the patience to understand the situation. Not many of them around, unfortunately. Of course, one of the sacrifices I had to make was an absence of any sexual relationship. As time went on, that became more and more difficult. Patrick was still a little mad, I could tell. Even though we did things as a family together, and usually ate dinner together, he seemed to focus all his attention on the kids. That was fine, for now, but I wanted our old life back. When we were together. That's okay, I thought. I was playing the long game. I had time. I'd done it once before, and I knew him so well, I was pretty sure I'd win him back. And I had a strategy. Friday nights I normally met a couple of unmarried buddies at the Red Caboose, a sports bar with an upscale pickup lounge. The guys and I liked the place because of the big screens and the occasional attractive females that liked the place too. The problem I faced was that most of the people that knew me, and there were a good percentage, knew me as being married. When I would try to explain that my wife and I were in an open type of marriage, that actually sounded sleazier. Suffice it to say, any of the women, knowing my situation, that would be interested in me, in general I didn't want. It reminded me of the old Groucho Marx line, "I wouldn't want to join a club that would have me as a member," or something to that effect. This created a frustration for me in a lot of ways. Certainly sexually, but also as a companion to do things with. It's been a few months now and I was still playing the game at home. Yes, I understood the children were the #1 priority, but I sensed things may be progressing with Patrick too. He wasn't as gruff to me when the children weren't around. And, I noticed him noticing me. Very subtly I began to wear clothes a little more revealing. Every so often he'd see me not quite completely dressed. I was confident he found me attractive. He always had. I was also reasonably confident he wasn't dating anyone. Of course I wasn't positive, but other than the occasional Friday when he went to the caboose, he was normally home at night. I began to hatch a plan. I knew that after he'd had a couple drinks he was normally interested in sex. Of course I knew his habits from our years married. I knew what he wanted and what turned him on. It was Friday night, he was out with the guys at the Red Caboose. I was dressed in only a towel, as if I'd just showered. I knew he normally got home around 11:30. Peeking out the window I saw the lights of the Uber turn onto our street. I hurried over to the refrigerator. Strategically I placed a corner of the towel into the fridge, shutting the door on the corner. I grabbed my water bottle. I waited. I heard the door open. I knew my timing had to be right. I heard him come around the corner and move into the kitchen. "Oh," I said, acting startled, and stood up from crouching in the refrigerator. Oops. With that, the towel, strategically stuck in the refrigerator, and there I was standing bare naked in front of him. My melons projected out, one hand falsely hiding my kitty. "You scared me," I told him, standing nude. Silently he came toward me. He reached for my melons, roughly fondling them, and then one hand groped my peach, pulling me into his stiffening groin. "Patrick," I breathed, acting slightly reluctant, "what are you doing?" I began, and then his mouth covered mine. He lifted me and abruptly dumped me on the kitchen table. Neither of us had had sex in some time, and it was over quickly, but it had been fulfilling, especially for Patrick. He gallantly helped me off the table, kissed my cheek, fondled my melon one last time, and retreated to the basement. I'd hoped to get him into my bed, but this was certainly a step in the right direction. Though my hopes of a continued intimacy didn't kick in. At least not immediately, the coldness in our interactions thawed. I knew Patrick and I were becoming more confident things would change. Things evolved in an uneventful way. Other than the time I caught her nude in the kitchen one Friday, our relationship was platonic. But there were many a night I lay in the basement with an erection, tempted to climb the stairs and find sexual gratification. Ultimately, I knew that was not right. It would send her the wrong message. She was still a beautiful, sexy woman, but I needed more than that out of a relationship. My close friends were all aware of Mia and my situation. Days became weeks, and weeks became months, and all of a sudden the dysfunction in our lives became the norm. I was neutral to pleasant toward Mia, and she was very nice to me. Occasionally I'd feel the softness of a melon bump me, or a supposedly inadvertent brush of my groin. But I, despite my physical longing, abstained. Those months became years. Mia's mother still helped, and Mia continued her job, quite successfully at Langley Motors. The kids were in school and life just progressed. Suddenly I discovered a welcome change in my life. It happened so suddenly it surprised me. Time passed for us, but it was pleasant. I loved the children, and now with the twins in school, there was a normalcy I felt like I was lucky to have. My job was great. Mitch moved to California, so I didn't have to run into him anymore and be reminded of my mistake. Somehow I needed to get back with Patrick. Lately he seemed in an upbeat mood, happier. Occasionally when all the kids had things going, it was just he and I. These were pleasant and friendly, but any attempt at anything physical, sexual, he avoided. He did quit going to the caboose with his buddies. He was home more. He started walking in the evening, leaving the house after dinner for a couple of hours 2 or 3 nights a week. I'd ask where he went and he just sat around. That was okay, I was just glad he wasn't hanging out with all the girls at the bar. That positive mood continued. The upbeat attitude coincided with his new walking habit and quitting the bar scene. My mood was affected by his, and I was happier. He was friendly and good-natured around me. I think things were progressing with us. Slowly, but improving. On rare occasions he gave me a kiss goodbye. No long passionate lip-to-lip smooch. More like a soft peck on the cheek. Sisterly. Every so often I'd try to turn to get lip-to-lip contact, but he avoided that, and then just gave me a little laugh, like it was a joke. I was getting frustrated with the stagnation of progress with Patrick, but on the other hand we were still living together. My mom encouraged me too. She'd reassure me with positive comments. Sometimes these things take time, she'd say. But I can tell, he cares for you. I was always buoyed by her comments. I just hoped they were true. The years stretched on with everything staying normal. Suddenly, it seemed, Michael was away at college and the dynamic around the house changed. The twins were occupied with school, activities, friends, and boyfriends. Patrick and I were both busy with our jobs. But one night Patrick said that we needed to take a family vacation to celebrate the twins' graduation from high school. In all these years we had not traveled together. This was progress, I thought. I'd like to take your mother too, Patrick told me. She was certainly a part of all our lives, and on one hand I was glad Patrick included Mom, but on the other hand I thought this could be a chance for him and I to increase our intimacy. 3 days later my mom was at the house when I got off work. She seemed excited about something. She could be in the way. Did you know about this? She asked me with a big smile on her face. What? I asked. She smiled and handed me a few printed pages of paper. When we talked to the twins about the vacation they both agreed on Disneyland. Even though they were certainly on the verge of adulthood, they were still kids at heart, and that's where they wanted to go. Apparently my mom had been snooping in Patrick's office while he was out of town. I looked through the travel documents to Southern California and the details of the trip to Disneyland. I knew all this. What was my mom excited about? I looked up. Keep reading, she told me. At first I didn't understand. There were further travel plans for 2 after Disneyland. To Hawaii. I kept reading. The Hapuna Beach Hotel on the Big Island, for 2. The trip would be right after the Disneyland trip. A week in Hawaii. Finally I got what my mom was excited about. It was going to be a surprise trip for the 2 of us. There were no flight documents in the printed sheets, but the hotel and rental car were reserved. Suddenly I was excited too. It was going to be a surprise for me. Mom, I began, you got to put all this back exactly how you found it. That night Patrick called me from his meeting. He said he wanted to talk to me about something, but not over the phone. I happily agreed. He said he'd be home the following night and suggested we have dinner at the Pasta House, a small Italian restaurant we used to go to. I was excited. He's going to tell me about the Hawaii trip, I thought. I got home that Friday afternoon. Mia was still at work. I texted her, "Need to run an errand, meet you at Pasta House at 6:30. I left the house with a bounce in my step. I was nervous and excited. I saw him sitting at the booth as I walked down the sidewalk to the Pasta House. I saw on the space next to him that he had something, maybe a document. It had to be the Hawaii trip. I smiled broadly as I sat down. I wanted to kiss him, but it was a bit awkward and I just sat. "How was your trip?" I asked, and we spent several minutes making small talk. There was a lull in the conversation and Patrick began talking. "Mia, as you know, our relationship these years," I began, "since all that business with Mitch has been untraditional, to say the least." Mia silently half smiled and nodded in agreement. But despite all that earlier conflict, we found a way to make things work. Both of us sacrificed for the stability of the children, and look at them, I smiled and said. "Michael's on his way to his engineering degree, Cleo's been admitted to Stanford, and Claire's going to Notre Dame. We both have a lot to be proud of," I told her. At that point I reached down and picked up the documents and put them on the table. Mia, still smiling, looked at the material, and then her face changed. She looked confused. "Now that the twins have graduated, I've exercised our post-nuptial agreement. You are now free to date without worrying about the children. In 60 days we will be legally divorced." She looked up at me stunned. "Mia, you will always be a part of my life. There were times when I was quite angry with you, but over the years I've mostly gotten over that," I told her. "I consider you a good friend," I happily told her. She stared at me, the smile she had changed to a confused frown. "Friends divorce, Patrick, I'm in love with you," she nearly shouted. "I don't want a divorce." I studied her puzzled. "Mia, the post-nuptial agreement spells it all out. Here it is," I said and slid the papers toward her. "You agreed to this, there's your signature of agreement," I said and pointed to the bottom of the page. "But what about the trip to Hawaii?" she asked, desperation in her voice. "Hawaii," I said. Now I was confused. "How did you know about the trip to Hawaii?" She sat there not answering. "I'm going to Hawaii with Teresa," I told her. "Teresa," she nearly screamed. Right after Ryan died I spent a lot of time with Teresa. Despite the challenges I was having with Mia, I knew I needed to support Teresa. For several months I was at their house multiple times per week. I recalled the promise I made to Ryan in those last few days. But after a while it became a burden to me. It was awkward and I didn't, at first, know why. I know a lot of it was sadness at the loss of my friend, but it was beyond that. My feelings for her were becoming romantic. That felt like a betrayal of my deceased friend. So I quit visiting Teresa. This was around the time I started hanging out at the Red Caboose. This was a hollow time in my life. I didn't have any type of dating life, and I recalled the single time I had spontaneous sex with Mia. I knew immediately that was a mistake. I began a different lifestyle, pledging to be healthy. I focused on my kids and my job. Fortunately, both those parts of my life were going well. About this time I began walking several miles after dinner, 2 or 3 times per week. My route took me right past Teresa and Ryan's house. Well, now just Teresa's, but I couldn't help but think of him whenever I went by. One summer night as I walked by I saw her watering some flower pots on the front porch. We got to chatting and she joined me on the walk. This became a habit and we began to walk regularly. As much time that we were spending together, it was hard for me not to notice how attractive Teresa was. Not the voluptuous curves of Mia, more like a distance runner. Lean with little body fat, but certainly nice-shaped melons and legs. I would admonish myself. This was my departed good friend's wife. I remembered the pledge I made to him. It had been a couple of years by now that I was hanging out with Teresa. As per my post-nuptial agreement, I did not commingle my home life with my friendship with Teresa. It was separate and not spoken of. Essentially a secret to my family. My fondness for Teresa grew, and our friendship grew stronger. We had gotten into a habit of hugging goodbye. The contact was brief, but even in the brevity I felt surges of sexual attraction. I had to keep reminding myself she was Ryan's widow. One summer night we were walking and we had an unexpected rainstorm. We were at the furthest distance from her house, so by the time we got back we were both soaked and cold. "You open the wine," Teresa said to me. "I'm going to take a quick shower." As I was in the kitchen with the wine I heard her say something from down the hall. "What?" I said back to her. I couldn't hear what she said. Finally I saw a naked arm open the door. I had a glimpse of her abdomen and part of her melon. I said, "Can you get me a towel? They're in the laundry room." I had a mixture of feelings walking to the laundry room: attraction, guilt, and certainly desire. I began. "Do you want me to leave it out here?" I asked, unsure. Just then the door cracked and her arm came through. Instead of grasping the towel, she grabbed my arm and pulled me in the bathroom. There, standing in front of me, I saw Teresa smiling and naked for the first time. I just stopped and stared. After a moment she smiled and said, "Get your clothes off and get in. It's getting cold," she said to me. And then, "It's about time." You can imagine what happened next. The following day when I went to Teresa's, it was awkward. Almost all on my part. After about 10 minutes of me acting odd, she asked me what was up. The good thing was our friendship was solid enough to have this kind of conversation. "I feel like I'm cheating on Ryan," I finally told her. She paused and studied me. "I want to tell you about one of our last conversations," Teresa began. She told me that Ryan told her that he felt guilty about dying. He felt he was letting her down. "Promise me you'll find a good man to spend your life with," he told her. She protested and said no one could ever take his place. Holding her hand, his eyes slowly shut, and then with surprising strength, his eyes flashed open, and with a small smile, he whispered, "Patrick. So you see," she said to me, "he's already given us his blessing." It was several years later. The twins were still in college, and it was a big day for Michael. The postnup went through smoothly. Myron had done a good job. Mia tried to protest, but the agreement was solid. Teresa and I were married. It was a small affair. Teresa's brother Tim, my good friend, was my best man. I moved into Teresa's house. I still thought of it as Teresa and Ryan's, couldn't help it. And Mia kept our family house. Michael was marrying his college girlfriend Bridget. She was a wonderful young woman, and I was glad they were together. It was later in the evening at the reception. I found myself alone at a table, maybe one too many glasses of champagne. I looked around the gathering quite content. Obviously it was a happy day for Michael. I watched him and Bridget dance. Claire was dancing with her boyfriend, a big guy, Daniel, who played football at Notre Dame. I liked him. Cleo was applying to med school and claimed she didn't have time for men. She was dancing on her own near her sister. Teresa was as beautiful as ever, and I saw her happily talking to a group of people. I was in a buzz, fulfilled state of mind. Just then I sensed someone sit in the unoccupied chair next to me. It was Mia. I turned and looked at her. She gained weight, and the stresses of life were evident on her face. She had aged. "Having a good time?" I asked pleasantly. Ever since our conversation at the pasta house, our relationship had been strained. She acted as if she was mad at me. "Yes, I guess," she said. "I'm very happy for Michael. He's a good guy, and he's marrying the right woman." There was a lull in the conversation, each with our private thoughts. And then I looked over and saw the silent tears falling. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Mia, you've been a fantastic mother," I said, trying to cheer her up. "Maybe a good mother," she said as she stood not looking at me, "but not so great a wife." And that's it for our two-part story, friends. If you enjoyed this story, drop a like and comment before you leave. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss any video. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.